Some voices are so powerful they can change the rules. In the world of music, there are pioneers who create a sound and there are purists who protect it. But every now and then, someone comes along who has the courage to do both. They honor the past while building the future, and in doing so, they risk the wrath of the old guard to create something entirely new. This is the story of two brothers from the coalfields of Kentucky who did just that. They took the traditional, high, lonesome sound of bluegrass music and supercharged it, plugging it in, adding drums, and sending a vocal harmony so high it seemed to scrape the sky. They gave the world one of the most famous songs to ever come out of the mountains, a tune that became an anthem for an entire state. But behind their 50-year partnership and their revolutionary sound was a hidden story of personal tragedy, secret battles with addiction, and a quiet resilience forged in war and hardship. This is the story of the rebels of bluegrass, the masters of harmony, the Osborne Brothers. To truly understand the Osborne Brothers, you must first understand the land that shaped them and the pervasive myths they would later quietly defy. Bobby Osborne entered the world on December 7, 1931, in the tiny community of Rourke, Kentucky, and his younger brother Sonny followed on October 29, 1937, in nearby Hyden. This was the heart of the Appalachian coal mining region of southeastern Kentucky, a land of breathtaking beauty and profound hardship. Here, music was not a commodity. It was woven into the very fabric of daily life. The old ballads and work songs, telling tales of John Henry or the tragedy of the Knoxville Girl, were the history books and the newspapers of the people, passed down through generations on front porches and in church pews. The classic bluegrass biography almost always begins with a story of soul-crushing poverty, of a desperate climb out of the darkness of the coal mines with nothing but a song and a dream. This narrative is powerful, and for many pioneers of the genre, it is undeniably true. But the Osborne story begins with a subtle, important difference, the first of many secrets that lie beneath the surface of their legend. Their family was not wealthy by any means, but they were a step removed from the destitution that is often painted as the universal Appalachian experience. Their father, Robert Sr., was a respected schoolteacher for 11 years before leaving the profession. Their paternal grandfather was a prominent figure in the community, a man of considerable local standing who owned the general store, a grist mill, a sawmill, a blacksmith shop, and even the local post office. They grew up surrounded by the realities of the Great Depression, witnessing the struggles of their neighbors and kin, but they did not experience it with the same sharp edge of desperation. This distinction is crucial because it reframes their entire musical journey. Their path into music was not solely a frantic scramble for a ticket out of poverty. It was a conscious artistic choice, an embrace of a cultural inheritance they deeply valued. It was born from a place of love and respect for tradition, not just a need to escape it. This more nuanced reality reflects the complex social tapestry of Appalachia, a place of proud, self-sufficient communities, not just a monolith of hardship. The Osborne story from its very beginning was about honoring their roots while refusing to be defined by the stereotypes associated with them. The world of their childhood was a world of sound. Before electricity was common in these remote hills, entertainment was homemade. The evenings were filled with the sound of their father playing the old-time fiddle, their mother singing the ancient ballads. This was their first classroom. They didn't learn music from books. They absorbed it through their skin. They learned the cadence of storytelling, the mournful ache of a minor key, and the driving rhythm of a dance tune, long before they ever picked up instruments of their own. But the world outside their Kentucky hollow was changing. As the nation geared up for World War II and the industrial engine of the North roared to life, a great migration was underway. Millions of Appalachian families, seeking steady wages and a different future for their children, began to leave the mountains for the factory towns of the Midwest. The Osborne family joined this historic exodus. In the early 1940s, their father moved the family to Dayton, Ohio, to take a secure job at the National Cash Register Company, a position he would hold for the next 30 years. For young Bobby and Sonny, the move was a profound dislocation. They were trading the rolling hills and quiet valleys of Kentucky for the flat, sprawling industrial landscape of Ohio. The tight-knit community where everyone knew their name was replaced by the anonymous bustle of a modern city. This experience of being outsiders, of being hillbillies in a northern city, would deeply inform their identity and their music. They were a part of two worlds, but fully belonged to neither. This feeling of being in between is the fertile ground from which their unique musical vision would grow. The move to Dayton was also an incredible expansion of their musical horizons. In Kentucky, their world had been the front porch. In Ohio, it became the radio dial. Suddenly, they were bombarded with a universe of new sounds. Late at night, they could pull in the powerful clear channel signal of WSM in Nashville. And for the first time, they heard the explosive, revolutionary sound of Bill Monroe and his Bluegrass boys. They heard the three-finger banjo roll of Earl Scruggs, a sound so clean, so powerful, it was like lightning in a bottle. This was the music that spoke their native language, but it was faster, more intricate, and more thrilling than anything they had ever heard before. The radio was their conservatory, their university. They would sit for hours, their ears pressed to the speaker, dissecting every note. Bobby, who had once dreamed of being a farmer or a basketball player, was now completely consumed by the mandolin. The pull of this new professionalized version of his native music was so powerful that he made the momentous decision to drop out of high school. It was a gamble, a turning away from the secure path his father had chosen, and a full-throated commitment to the uncertain life of a musician. Sonny, 6 years younger, was a prodigy. He picked up the banjo and, with an almost supernatural talent, began to emulate the complex styles of his heroes. He started performing professionally while he was still a child, playing local shows with his older siblings between 1949 and 1952. But just as their paths seemed destined to merge, the wider world intervened, sending the two brothers on separate, formative journeys that would shape them into the artists they were to become. For Sonny, the call came from the very source of his inspiration. In 1952, at the impossibly young age of 14, he was hired to play banjo for the creator of the genre, the legendary and notoriously difficult Bill Monroe. For a teenager from Ohio, this was like being called up to play for the New York Yankees. It was an honor, but it was also a trial by fire. He was thrown into the grueling life of a touring musician, living on the road, playing nightly on the stage of the Grand Ole Opry, and enduring the famously demanding leadership of Monroe, a man who expected nothing less than perfection. This experience, lasting until 1953, was Sonny's crucible. It was where he transformed from a gifted amateur into a seasoned professional, learning the hard lessons of timing, discipline, and survival in the high-stakes world of bluegrass. While Sonny was on the road with Monroe, Bobby was facing a challenge of a completely different and far more dangerous nature. In 1952, with the Korean War raging, he was drafted into the United States Marine Corps. This chapter of his life is one of the most significant, yet least discussed parts of his story. He wasn't stationed safely stateside. He was sent to the front lines in Korea, a brutal and bloody conflict, often called the forgotten war. It is impossible to overstate the impact this would have had on a young man from the mountains. He was thrust into the chaos and terror of combat. Like many veterans of his generation, he rarely spoke in detail about what he saw or did there. But in that environment of extreme stress and constant danger, music became more than a passion. It became a lifeline. It was a connection to home, a way to maintain his humanity in the face of unimaginable horror. When he returned to the United States in 1954, he was no longer just a talented musician. He was a decorated combat veteran, a man who had seen the world and had been profoundly changed by it. When Bobby returned, the two brothers were finally ready to unite. They were no longer the boys who had left Kentucky. Sonny was a seasoned professional, a graduate of the Bill Monroe School of Hard Knocks. Bobby was a man, forged and tempered by the brutal realities of war. These separate, intense experiences had given them a maturity and a depth that would set them apart. They began their professional career together in the smoky clubs and rowdy honky-tonks of Dayton, Cincinnati, and Detroit. The environment was tough. In the early 1950s, bluegrass was not the celebrated genre it is today. To the urban audiences of the North, it was often dismissed as hillbilly music. The Osbornes found themselves playing for noisy, indifferent, and sometimes hostile crowds. They recounted a particularly brutal gig at the Flame Club in Minneapolis, where the audience talked and shouted so loudly over their acoustic instruments that they were completely drowned out. It was in these moments of frustration and desperation that the seeds of their future revolution were planted. They realized that if they were going to be heard, if they were going to command the respect of these new audiences, they couldn't just play the music the way it had always been played. They would have to make it bigger, louder, and more powerful. They needed to find a way to make the world stop and listen. The decision to plug in their instruments, a choice that would later brand them as rebels, wasn't born from a desire to betray tradition, but from the simple, pragmatic need to survive in the musical trenches. The two brothers, now finally together, were on the cusp of a journey that would take them to the heights of stardom. But first, they had to fight their way out of the bars. Those rooms taught a blunt lesson. Tradition alone wouldn't cut through the din. Their acoustic instruments, so powerful on a Kentucky porch, were whispers in the urban din. Before they could build their own sonic empire, they needed an apprenticeship in the major leagues of bluegrass. Their opportunity came not by starting their own band immediately, but by joining the ranks of one of the genre's most powerful and dynamic figures, a move that would sharpen their skills and solidify their reputation, paving the way for the revolution to come. A soldier returns from war carrying the silent burdens of what he's seen. A prodigy returns from the road, his youthful talent now hardened into professional steel. In 1954, when Bobby Osborne came home from the brutal front lines of Korea, he reunited with his younger brother, Sonny, a recent graduate of the Bill Monroe School of Hard Knocks. They were no longer the boys who had left the hills of Kentucky. They were men, forged in separate fiery crucibles. Now, for the first time, they would stand together, ready to fuse their experiences into a single, unified, musical force. Their journey would not be an easy one. They were about to step into the fierce, competitive world of professional bluegrass, where they would be forced to fight for their place, challenge the very definition of their genre, and create a sound so radical it would brand them as both visionaries and heretics. Their first major step as a united duo was to join forces with a man who was himself a bluegrass tornado, the great Jimmy Martin. As key members of Martin's Sunny Mountain Boys, they entered the upper echelon of the genre. This wasn't just another band. It was a bluegrass supergroup in the making. Jimmy Martin was known as the King of Bluegrass, a vocalist of immense power and swagger, and a rhythm guitarist who drove a band like a locomotive. He represented the raw, high lonesome heart of the tradition. In this powerful lineup, the Osborne Brothers' unique talents were the perfect complement. Bobby's soaring tenor harmony blended with Martin's lead to create a sound of thrilling intensity, while Sonny's inventive, driving banjo provided a constant stream of energy. Together, they went into the studio for the prestigious RCA Victor label, cutting records that are now considered classics of the genre. This period was their postgraduate education. They were learning how to work within a top-tier professional band, how to arrange songs for records, and how to hold their own alongside a massive talent like Martin. But the very brilliance of the lineup may have also been the reason for its eventual demise. The world of bluegrass is filled with strong-willed, visionary artists, and this band had 3 of them. The creative friction was immense. By 1955, the brothers knew they needed to step out from under Martin's shadow and forge a path that was entirely their own. They parted ways amicably, armed with major label credentials and a clear vision of the sound they wanted to create. They struck out on their own, a daunting prospect for 2 young men in their early 20s. They found a home for a time on the influential WWVA Jamboree, a live radio show broadcast from Wheeling, West Virginia, that was a crucial stepping stone for many country and bluegrass acts. It was here they began to truly hone their identity. They were no longer complimenting another artist. They were the main event. They started to experiment, to push the boundaries, and to confront the central conflict that would define their career: how to honor the tradition they loved while creating a sound that could connect with a modern mainstream audience. Their big break came in 1956 when they signed a recording contract with a major label, MGM Records. Paired with the powerful singer Red Allen, they entered the studio and, in 1958, released a song that would put them on the national map. The song was a fiery, updated version of an old folk tune, "Ruby, Are You Mad?" From the opening notes, it was clear this was something different. The track was driven by the sound of twin banjos, played in harmony by Sonny and another picker, a rich, layered texture that was a complete novelty at the time. Over this powerful instrumental bed, Bobby's lead vocal soared. The record found its champion in a radio DJ named Tommy Sutton, who fell in love with its energy and played it relentlessly. In the pre-internet age, a powerful DJ was a kingmaker, and Sutton's enthusiasm propelled Ruby up the charts. It became a national hit, climbing to number 13 on the Billboard Country chart. The Osborne Brothers were no longer just a respected act within the small world of bluegrass. They were country music stars. The success of Ruby gave them the commercial clout to pursue their most radical vision. Their experiences in the noisy clubs of Ohio had taught them a fundamental lesson. Acoustic music, no matter how brilliantly played, had a sonic ceiling. To truly compete with the electrified sounds of country and rock and roll, and to command the attention of a modern audience, they needed more power. And so they began to commit what many in the bluegrass world considered to be the ultimate sin. As early as 1957, in their MGM recording sessions, they began adding drums. At first, it was just a subtle brushed snare, but it was enough to send shockwaves through the community. Bluegrass, as defined by its founding father, Bill Monroe, was a purely acoustic art form. It was a string band tradition. Drums belonged to country music, to rock and roll, to anything but the pure, high lonesome sound. To the purists, the Osbornes' decision was a profound betrayal. But they didn't stop there. They brought in a dobro, a resonator guitar whose soulful, bluesy sound added a new emotional texture. And most controversially of all, they began amplifying their instruments on stage. Sonny, a relentless tinkerer and innovator, developed a magnetic pickup system for his banjo. This allowed him to be heard clearly in any venue, from a noisy bar to a large auditorium, without being tethered to a microphone. It gave him freedom of movement and a consistently powerful tone. To the traditionalists, this was the final straw. They were sellouts, chasing commercial success at the expense of artistic purity. The backlash was intense and at times deeply personal. The conflict came to a head in one of the most infamous and shocking incidents in bluegrass history. They were playing at a bluegrass festival in the 1960s, a gathering of the faithful. In the middle of their set, as Sonny was tearing through a blistering banjo solo, his instrument suddenly went dead silent. There was a moment of confused silence from the stage and the audience. Sonny looked down at his equipment and discovered the unbelievable. Someone had walked up to the stage and deliberately cut his amplifier cord with a pair of pliers or a knife. It was an act of sabotage, a physical assault on their music, by a purist zealot who saw their innovations as a personal affront to the genre. The incident was a stark, ugly manifestation of the ideological war being waged for the soul of bluegrass. For Sonny, it was a deeply wounding but also clarifying moment. He realized the depth of the animosity they faced. From that day forward, he became fiercely, almost obsessively, protective of his sound system. He even began padlocking the resonator on the back of his banjo to keep his custom-built pickup technology a secret from prying eyes. The cord-cutting incident became a symbol of their rebellion. They were musical outlaws, and they wore the title with a defiant pride. What the purists failed to understand was that the Osborne's rebellion was working. While they were alienating the old guard, they were attracting a whole new audience. Their modern, powerful, and accessible sound appealed to younger listeners who had been raised on rock and roll and mainstream country. This was proven in 1960 when they were invited to perform at Antioch College in Ohio. It was a landmark event. They became the very first bluegrass band to play a concert on a college campus, opening the door for the genre to become a staple of the folk revival movement that would sweep the nation in the coming years. They were building a bridge between the past and the future, even as the guardians of the past were trying to burn it down behind them. Their commercial success and growing fan base could not be ignored by the Nashville establishment. In 1963, they signed a new contract with a major label, Decca Records, and on August 8, 1964, they received the ultimate validation. The boys from Kentucky who had been branded as heretics were invited to become official members of the Grand Ole Opry. It was a stunning victory. From the genre's most sacred stage, they were now free to perfect and showcase their most important and lasting innovation. Their revolutionary approach to vocal harmony. For years, bluegrass harmony had followed a strict formula established by Bill Monroe. A lead singer sang the melody, a tenor singer added a harmony above the melody, and a baritone singer filled in the notes below. It was a beautiful and effective structure, but it was also rigid. The Osborne Brothers, quite literally, turned it upside down. The key was Bobby's extraordinary voice. He possessed a powerful, piercing tenor that could cut through any instrumental arrangement. They made the radical decision to have Bobby sing the lead part in this high tenor register. Sonny, with his smooth baritone, would then sing the harmony part below Bobby's lead. A third singer, usually the guitarist, would then add a lower tenor harmony, also below the lead. This high lead or stacked harmony was unlike anything anyone had ever heard in bluegrass. It created a thrilling, soaring sound that was incredibly powerful and emotionally resonant. It also had a practical advantage. Since the lead was on top, it gave them the freedom to hire different third singers over the years without having to completely rework their vocal arrangements. This vocal structure was their true masterpiece, a sound that was instantly recognizable and would go on to influence countless bluegrass and country acts for generations to come. The Osborne Brothers had arrived. They had survived the clubs, battled the purists, and conquered the charts. They had taken their place on the grand ole Opry stage, not by conforming to the rules, but by rewriting them. They had created a sound that was entirely their own, a perfect fusion of Appalachian tradition and modern power. They were now established stars, but their biggest, most enduring contribution to the American songbook was still just around the corner. Having secured their place on the grand ole Opry stage, the Osborne Brothers had won the war for their sound. The battles with the purists were over, and their unique high lead harmony was now their celebrated signature. They had achieved the dream of every Nashville musician: professional respect, commercial success, and a permanent home in the heart of country music. But professional success is fleeting. Cultural immortality is a different prize altogether. It often arrives not through careful planning, but as a gift of pure chance, a happy accident in the form of a simple 10-minute song that was about to change their lives and the identity of an entire state forever. They now stood at the summit, rebels turned standard bearers, poised for the song that would outlive them. As official members of the Grand Ole Opry, they had been embraced by the very establishment they had so often challenged. Their revolutionary sound, the plugged-in instruments, the driving drums, and that soaring, high-lead harmony was now a celebrated part of the Nashville soundscape. They had proven that tradition and innovation could coexist in a thrilling, powerful fusion. They had earned their place. But in the world of music, reaching the top of the mountain is one thing. Planting a flag that will fly forever is another. They were about to be handed a song, a happy accident from a legendary hit-making duo that would elevate them from stars into American cultural icons. To understand the phenomenon of Rocky Top, you first have to understand the genius of Felice and Boudleaux Bryant. In the 1960s, the Bryants were Nashville royalty, a husband and wife songwriting team with a golden touch. They were the architects behind some of the most enduring hits of the era, crafting classics like Bye Bye Love and All I Have to Do Is Dream for the Everly Brothers. They were masters of melody and masters of emotion, known for their beautifully constructed ballads. In 1967, they were hard at work on a project of slow, sentimental songs for the country artist Skeeter Davis. The work was emotionally draining, and they found themselves stuck, bogged down in the melancholy of the ballads. To clear their heads, they decided to take a 10-minute break and write something completely different, something fast, fun, and energetic. They let their minds wander back to the misty peaks and rustic cabins of the Great Smoky Mountains, a place of simple living and fierce independence. In a burst of pure, uninhibited creativity, they wrote Rocky Top. It was a whirlwind of lyrics, a cascade of nostalgic images of corn in a jar, strangers on a mountain, and a longing for a simpler life. It wasn't meant to be a masterpiece, it was just a diversion, a little folk song to break up the monotony of their serious work. When the song was finished, they pitched it to the Osborne Brothers. Bobby and Sonny immediately recognized the raw, untamed energy in the song. It was a perfect fit for their driving, high-energy style. They took the Bryant's simple folk tune into the studio and transformed it into a bluegrass anthem. Sonny kicked it off with a banjo roll that was pure, joyful acceleration. The band kicked in with a rhythm that was relentless and infectious. And then came the vocals. Bobby's high lead tenor soared over the top, perfectly capturing the song's mix of breathless excitement and heartfelt nostalgia. Released in 1967, the public reaction to Rocky Top was immediate and explosive. It was a musical lightning strike. The single sold an astonishing 85,000 copies in its first 2 weeks alone, a staggering number for a bluegrass-rooted act at the time. It shot up the country charts, becoming one of the biggest hits of their career. But the story of Rocky Top was just beginning. The song quickly transcended the boundaries of country radio. It had a universal appeal, a feeling of pure, unadulterated joy that was impossible to resist. Its true destiny, however, would be found not on the airwaves, but in the stadiums. The University of Tennessee's Pride of the Southland band, looking for a tune that captured the spirit of their home state, adopted Rocky Top as an unofficial fight song. The effect was magical. Imagine a stadium of over 100,000 passionate football fans, a sea of orange and white, all stomping their feet and singing along at the top of their lungs every single time their team, the Volunteers, scored a touchdown. The song became synonymous with Tennessee football, a deafening, joyous roar of regional pride. In 1982, the state of Tennessee made it official, naming Rocky Top one of its official state songs. A 10-minute diversion written in a hotel room had become a permanent part of the American cultural landscape. The success of Rocky Top elevated the Osborne Brothers to a new level of fame and respect. They were no longer just bluegrass stars. They were ambassadors for an entire region. This new status was solidified in 1971 when they achieved what was once unthinkable for a band with their roots. They won the Country Music Association CMA Award for Vocal Group of the Year, beating out mainstream country acts. It was a powerful acknowledgement from the Nashville establishment that their unique harmony-driven sound was now at the very center of popular music. 2 years later, in 1973, they received another immense honor, becoming the first bluegrass band in history to perform at the White House for President Richard Nixon. The boys from the coalfields of Kentucky were now playing in the halls of power. Their music a recognized and celebrated part of the nation's cultural heritage. From the outside, the Osborne Brothers were living a dream. They were beloved stars, respected innovators, and cultural icons. But the relentless demands of the life they had chosen, the endless touring, the pressure to maintain their success, the temptations of the road, were taking a devastating private toll. For 50 years, they maintained an almost unbroken partnership, a testament to their deep brotherly bond. But as Sonny would later admit, that partnership endured stormy periods. And behind the curtain of fame, they were facing personal battles that threatened to destroy not just their careers, but their lives. The most dangerous and closely guarded secret of their career was Sonny's long and harrowing struggle with addiction. The life of a touring musician in the 1960s and 70s was a grueling test of endurance. It was a life lived in a state of perpetual motion, a blur of highways, cheap motels, and backstage dressing rooms. The pressure to be on every single night, to deliver a high-energy performance for a paying audience was immense. To cope with the exhaustion and the loneliness, many musicians of that era turned to artificial means to keep going. Sonny fell into this trap. He developed a dependence on alcohol and, more dangerously, on amphetamines or speed, which were commonly and often cavalierly prescribed by doctors to help musicians endure the brutal schedule. The drugs provided a false energy, allowing him to drive all night to the next gig and still have the stamina to perform, but the cost was catastrophic. In a moment of shocking and courageous honesty late in his life, Sonny reflected on this dark period and made a startling admission. He believed his years of drug and alcohol abuse had likely shortened his life by a full 10 to 15 years. He called it a trade for security, the terrible price he paid to maintain the career that provided for his family. His struggle was a quiet, desperate, and lonely one. But the story of Sonny's addiction does not end in tragedy. It ends with an act of almost unbelievable personal strength. In 1968, he made the decision to quit drinking, and then, around 1977 or 1978, he faced down his amphetamine addiction. In an era before the proliferation of modern rehab facilities and support groups, he did it on his own, through sheer force of will, without professional intervention. It was a silent, private victory, a testament to an inner resilience that was as powerful as any banjo roll he ever played. He had stared into the abyss and had found his own way back. Just as Sonny was winning his private war, Bobby was about to face a sudden and terrifying battle of his own. In September of 1982, Bobby, who had always lived a hard-charging life, began experiencing chest pains. He was rushed to the hospital and diagnosed with severely blocked coronary arteries. He was in immediate danger of a massive heart attack. The only option was emergency quintuple bypass surgery. The man who had survived the front lines of the Korean War was now facing a different kind of enemy, one from within. The surgery was a success, but the experience was a profound and life-altering reckoning with mortality. For a man whose life was defined by the relentless energy of performing, being brought so close to the edge was a massive wake-up call. He was forced to completely reevaluate his life. The reckless lifestyle of the road was no longer sustainable. On his doctor's orders, he adopted a strict new diet and, with characteristic determination, took up jogging. The man who had once been a farmer had to hire help to manage his beloved farm, the physical labor now too strenuous for his recovering heart. This health crisis was a pivotal moment for both brothers. It was a stark reminder of their own fragility. They had survived the music industry, they had survived the controversies, and they had survived their own personal demons. But they were not invincible. The boys from Kentucky were now middle-aged men, and the decades of hard living and relentless work were beginning to catch up with them. They had reached the absolute zenith of their profession, their names etched into the history of American music. But now, they faced their most difficult challenge yet, the fight to preserve their own health and to navigate the final chapters of their legendary partnership. Staring down their own mortality and winning gave the brothers a perspective that fame and fortune never could. The frantic scramble for the next hit and the endless miles on the highway were replaced by a deeper understanding of what truly mattered: their health, their family, and the legacy they would leave behind. Having survived the wars both on the battlefield and within themselves, they entered the final act of their career not as restless innovators, but as guardians of the flame. The era of rebellion was over. The era of recognition, reconciliation, and cementing their permanent place in the history of American music was about to begin. Survival changes a person. It strips away the non-essential, leaving behind a core of hard-won wisdom. For the Osborne Brothers, the decades of relentless touring, the battles with industry purists, and the private wars they had waged against their own mortality had forged them into something more than just stars. They had entered a new season of their lives, no longer the brash young rebels, but the revered elder statesmen of the genre they had helped to redefine. This final chapter of their story is not one of decline, but of legacy. It is the story of their long victory lap, the poignant end of a legendary partnership, and the final, enduring echo of two voices that together created a sound for the ages. The 1980s and 90s were a period of reconciliation and profound recognition for the Osborne Brothers. The musical world they had fought so hard to create was now the established landscape. The innovations that had once branded them as heretics were now standard practice. Their influence woven so deeply into the fabric of modern bluegrass and country music that it was often taken for granted, and the institutions that had once viewed them with suspicion now sought to honor them as living legends. The ultimate full-circle moment came in 1994. Bobby and Sonny Osborne were inducted into the International Bluegrass Music Association's Hall of Honor. It was the genre's highest tribute, a definitive acknowledgement of their immense contribution. This was more than just an award. It was a peace treaty. The purists and the progressives, the two factions of the world they had once split in two, now stood together in a unified round of applause. The rebels had finally officially been welcomed home, their place in the pantheon of bluegrass pioneers forever secured. The honors continued to accumulate. In 1997, Sonny received one of the nation's most prestigious cultural awards, the National Heritage Fellowship from the National Endowment for the Arts. This award recognized him not just as a musician, but as a master of a traditional American art form, a carrier of a vital cultural flame. It was a profound validation for a man who had spent his life pushing the boundaries of that very art form. Their music, which had been born in the isolated hills of Kentucky, was now a global phenomenon. They toured internationally, their unique sound captivating audiences far from the Appalachian hollers. In a testament to the sophistication of their arrangements, they performed with full symphony orchestras, the intricate lines of Sonny's banjo and Bobby's mandolin weaving through the lush strings, proving that bluegrass could be as complex and moving as any classical form. Their enduring fame even landed them a long-running, prestigious gig at Harrah's Casino in Lake Tahoe, a world of glitz and glamour that was a universe away from the smoky honky-tonks where they had started. But even as they enjoyed this long, golden autumn of their career, the relentless passage of time and the physical toll of a lifetime of performance were catching up with them. The tragic, unspoken secret of every great musician is that the body can betray the spirit. For a banjo player, the hands, wrists, and shoulders are the entire toolkit. For Sonny, 50 years of playing his heavy, amplified banjo with a powerful athletic style had done irreparable damage. In 2004, a severe rotator cuff injury in his shoulder required major surgery. The procedure was a success, but the recovery was long and difficult. He was faced with a heartbreaking reality. His body could no longer meet the impossibly high standards he had set for himself. And so, with a quiet dignity, Sonny Osborne made the decision to retire. In 2004, after more than 50 years of standing side by side on stage, the Osborne Brothers duo performed for the last time. It was the end of one of the longest, most stable, and most influential partnerships in the history of American music. There was no dramatic breakup, no brotherly feud. It was simply a concession to the physical realities of a life lived in service to a demanding art. The music world was stunned. For fans, the idea of bluegrass without the Osborne Brothers seemed impossible. But for Sonny, a man who had already conquered so much, this final battle was one he knew he could not win. It was time to rest. While Sonny stepped away from the spotlight, Bobby was simply not built for retirement. For him, the stage was not a job, it was his natural habitat. The energy of a live audience was his lifeblood. With Sonny's blessing, Bobby formed a new band, aptly named the Rocky Top Express. He returned to the road, a beloved elder statesman carrying the torch of their shared legacy. His continued presence on the Grand Ole Opry was a source of joy and inspiration for generations of fans. Well into his 80s and even into his early 90s, Bobby remained a regular and vital performer. He would step up to the microphone, his body aged but his spirit undiminished, and that iconic, piercing, high tenor voice would ring out through the auditorium. It may have lost some of its youthful power, but it had gained a lifetime of wisdom and soul. To see him perform in his later years was to witness a masterclass in endurance, a testament to a love for music so profound that it could defy age itself. He was a living monument, the last of the golden era giants still walking the stage. When we measure the final legacy of the Osborne Brothers, we find it etched into the very sound of modern music. They were, without question, the essential bridge between the past and future of their genre. They took the rigid acoustic tradition of Bill Monroe and threw open the doors to the electric, progressive future of newgrass revival and the countless Americana and country artists who followed. Their revolutionary high lead vocal arrangement is now a standard tool in the bluegrass harmony toolbox. Their courage to amplify their instruments and add drums, once an act of heresy, is now commonplace. After a long and peaceful retirement, Sonny Osborne passed away at his home on October 24th, 2021, at the age of 83. His heart, which had endured so much, was finally tired. On June 27, 2023, his older brother Bobby followed him. He passed away in a hospital at the age of 91. In a final beautiful testament to his life's passion, it was reported that he was still planning and booking future shows, right up until the very end. The performer was a performer until his last breath. Their deaths marked the true closing of a chapter, the definitive end of the golden era of bluegrass. They were laid to rest, two Kentucky boys who had conquered the world with a song. In the end, the story of the Osborne Brothers is one of the most American stories ever told. It's a story about honoring the past by daring to build a new future. It's about the incredible highs of fame and the private human cost of a life lived in the spotlight. They were rebels who became revered elders, outlaws who became icons. And though the two brothers are now gone, their voices locked together in that one-of-a-kind harmony will soar forever.